I view it very similar to, now that we were bringing up the Spurs, kind of similar to the Spurs or even Golden State, where you're coming into the season and you're expecting a championship, and there's nothing less than that. And that's what Minnesota does, year in and year out. They expected a championship last year. They expected a championship this year. Even if they were, 10th in the league last year, they come into this season expecting a championship just because that's what this organization does, and that's the culture Cheryl Reeve has established and kind of laid down in this organization. And I think that's why they've been so successful. They bring in talented people also who are good people and are good fits, and that's just absolute credit to Cheryl Reeve and what she's able to do and the players she's able to bring in and the relationships she has with players across the league as well as a whole organization in doing that. But yeah, I mean, players realize that this is a winning organization. They want to be a part of it. They see the culture that is in Minnesota, and I think that goes a long way.
We've delved into plenty of teams within the WNBA, but we haven't really talked too much about the Minnesota Lynx. So it's a pleasure to have you on, especially just the way they've been really dominating the W as of late, not only this year, but in years past. So it's appropriate to get your analysis on the Lynx. So let's jump into it. As of now, they're 23-5, sitting first atop the entire WNBA. Just kind of a broad question. What do you think of their season so far, just in terms of your expectations entering this season? Is this what you had them at, or this was a surprise to you? Just how fast they've started.
I did think that they would be one of the top teams in the WNBA coming into it. Just strictly off of last year and in the returning players that they did have coming back to this roster this year. I will admit that I did not expect them to have as hot of a start as they've had and to be as impressive as they have. That part has caught me a little bit off guard, but I mean, you'll obviously take that if you're Cheryl Reeve and the Minnesota Lynx, but it's been an impressive start, not only record-wise and just what they've been able to do that way, but how they're playing on both sides of the floor. And I know that's something that Cheryl Reeve has talked about a lot with leading this team, even in years past, that defense leads offense. They need to focus on their defensive effort, and that'll turn into offense. And that's exactly what we've seen so far. And that, as a result, has resulted in a 23-5 start through 28 games. So it's been an impressive start, and now I know they're obviously hoping that continues here in the second half of the season.
Can you talk about this team's motivation after the WNBA finals, such a heartbreaking way to lose? How does that factor into their success this season, you think?
Early on, I think it's something that's in the back of their minds. You can tell in the players that is a little bit of a motivator for them. I know that, I think the first day of training camp, I wrote about this actually at Canis Hoopus, or either Winsight or Canis Hoopus, one of the sites that I do write for, but they had talked about at the first day of training camp, how they, in 2000, some fans might remember in 2016, the Lynx lost in a last second fashion, similar to what happened in 2024, but they lost in 2016 to the LA Sparks, and then came back in 2017 and ended up beating them in the finals. And they talked about the similarities between that season and what could be this season, or especially how 24 ended and how 25 could result. So that is something that they thought of, and they've talked about at the beginning of the year. And I know with Rebecca Brunson and Lindsay Whalen, who were both on that dynasty team, but specifically the 2016-2017 teams, they're on the coaching staff now. So they know what it takes. They know kind of that motivator, what's in the back of their minds. So I think that helps. But Cheryl Reeve has talked about, throughout the season that, yeah, it's something they think about. That's something that, is in the back of their minds, but that's not something they're focused on anymore. They can't change the outcome anymore. Now it's just a matter of taking advantage of this season and making sure that, what happened last season doesn't happen this season. So I do think it's a little bit of a motivator, but I don't think it's incredibly big as much as some people might think. I think they've officially turned the page, but now that they are playing, we just saw them play the Liberty for the first time, and now that they're going to be playing them here in the next couple weeks, a total of 4 times spanning back to the first game that just took place. But now that they're playing them, that might kind of bring that thought back into their minds of they, it's kind of that revenge tour that some players have called it. Yeah, so it is a motivator. I don't think it's necessarily something that's consuming them, but it is a driving force for them.
Just thinking about the opportunity this season as well, when you compare this season to last season, it sounded like it's been a pleasant surprise to see them start off with this blazing hot record. But looking around the rest of the WNBA landscape too, does this year seem like maybe even more opportune of a season for them to cash in on a title?
Yeah, I do think that I think they're a better team this year than what they were last year. They do have a lot of the returning, the starting five is the same as what we saw last year. And they haven't played their best either. One player in particular in the starting five, Bridget Carlton, she hasn't played her best or really like what we saw of her last season. So they haven't played their best basketball yet, and they're still 23. But with that said, I do think they're a better team. They're deeper this year. Now, the Carly Samuelson injury that happened in the early first half, or not early first half, but in the first half of the season, that did put a little bit of a damper on things, just because I know that they were very high on her and what she could do to this team, specifically coming off the bench. But you look at some of the players that they did add. They, re-signed Jess Shepard, who didn't play last year while staying overseas. Natisha Heidemann has been playing really well. Diamond Miller's been getting some more minutes and been using some of that, those opportunities to her advantage and making the most of those opportunities. So they are a very deep team. And you even look at the starting five. When they played the New York Liberty on July 30th in the first time of the year, that the starting five was incredibly spread out. Napheesa Collier is obviously leading the charge, but they can hurt you from multiple ways. They can even 6-7 players deep, and that's dangerous. And that's something that's gonna be really key in the postseason, specifically when you are playing that constant chess match with another team in a series. They were a talented team last year, obviously, but I do think this year they're a little bit better, not only with the talent that they have on the team and the personnel that they have on the team, but just skill-wise, I think they're just an overall better team, and they're performing better than what they were last year at this point.
Do you think in some ways that continuity that the Lynx have this year is a big advantage? Because it seems like over the offseason we saw massive roster turnover, and that's not uncommon in the WNBA for things to move around quite a bit. Would you say in comparison to other sports leagues that continuity advantage is more pronounced in the W?
Yeah, I when it comes specifically to the Lynx, I know that that's something that's played a big role this year. I actually wrote about this at the beginning of the year too, the relationship between Courtney Williams and Lindsay Whalen, and how that's helped, not just Courtney Williams, and you can throw Natisha Heidemann into that too, but Lindsay Whalen talked about what she got traded to Minnesota in 2010, how it took a full season for her to really understand Cheryl Reeve, her system, and just kind of feel comfortable. And then once that second season came under the same system, she felt like she was playing her best basketball. And I think that's what we're seeing, similar to like Courtney Williams, Natisha Heidemann, but the team in general. You obviously played with each other last year, and it was kind of their first time, well, it was for some of the players the first time being on this team and kind of incorporating themselves into the system and learning their roles and the scheme and all that stuff. But now this year they can just hit the ground running, and that's exactly what they've done. So I do think continuity is a big thing, and the coaching staff, the coaching continuity, and just the personnel you have in your staff too, to prepare not only night in, night out, but prepare the players too. That's a huge thing. And it will, not to bring this up again, but it will play a huge role in the playoffs because you understand everything inside out. And I think that the continuity is a huge advantage for Minnesota.
Well, it seems that continuity has paid off. And one of our former guests, Noah Dalzell, wrote an article on Yahoo Sports and compared the Lynx to the 2014 Spurs, which I find very interesting. And what comes to mind with the Lynx success is very similar to what happened with the Golden State Warriors in that magical season where they almost ran the table, but that they lost heartbreakingly in the NBA Finals. I'm just wondering, with the Lynx, are they paying attention to that in terms of just, being compared to other great teams of the past? Does that matter to them? Could that possibly derail them, or are they just focused on what's happening? I'm just very curious about that dichotomy, because players they're not honest in terms of answering that question, but I'm just curious if that's even a factor or not.
The players and the coaches, they hear everything. They see things that we see, even if they don't admit it. But I honestly, and I'm not just saying this, I don't think it really is a factor to them. I don't think they're really thinking about that. it is an interesting comparison. The 2014 Spurs are just kind of the spread outness of this team, if that's even a word, but how spread out they are with, the talent on this roster and the depth, and they're playing complete team basketball. You see a lot of, whether it's NBA, WNBA, sometimes you have that quote unquote big three. Minnesota has that. I mean, they have Courtney Williams, Kayla McBride, and Napheesa Collier, who are extremely talented and do form a talented big three, but they have a great supporting cast around them. And I think that's what we've seen from a lot of the great teams, is that you have a deep roster. You can go 7, 8 deep with the players you can play night in and night out. And so I do think there are some similarities, of course, but I don't think that it's really something that they pay attention to or, quite frankly, care about. But they do see that. They see everything like we do.
Curious your thoughts on kind of the perception of this franchise overall, because it's a very successful franchise in the W. And now, granted, very outside opinion looking in, but it does seem like this franchise doesn't maybe get the limelight relative to their success the way that some of the other teams in the W do. Do you share that same sense, or do you see that from your perspective? And if so, why do you think that's the cause?
I do think that a lot of people are, in the mindset of what have you done for me lately? And I think, quite frankly, the Lynx haven't won since 2017. So it's kind of, regardless of their success that they've had in the past, people remember what's happened in the last couple of years. They remember what happened last year. They see Las Vegas and New York and how talented they are and the star power they have, and the players are on social media. So that, it does kind of consume, the fans that way. But when it comes to Minnesota, like you hear players all the time, you hear coaches all the time talk about, this is a winning franchise. I view it very similar to, that now that we were bringing up the Spurs, kind of similar to the Spurs or even Golden State, where you're coming into the season and you're expecting a championship, and there's nothing less than that. And that's what Minnesota does, year in and year out. They expected a championship last year. They expected a championship this year. Even if they were, 10th in the league last year, they come into this season expecting a championship, just because that's what this organization does. And that's the culture Cheryl Reeve has established and kind of laid down in this organization. And I think that's why that they've been so successful. They bring in talented people, also who are good people and are good fits. And that's an absolute credit to Cheryl Reeve and what she's able to do, and the players she's able to bring in, and the relationships she has with players across the league, as well as the whole organization in doing that. But yeah, I mean, players realize that this is a winning organization. They want to be a part of it. They see the culture that is in Minnesota. And I think that goes a long way, even, across leagues, NBA, WNBA, college basketball, whatever it is. A winning program and a winning head coach and just kind of a good culture like that. Players want to be a part of it. And that's what's kind of happened in Minnesota ever since really Cheryl Reeve got there in 2010.
So then is it fair to continue the Spurs analogy and kind of say that Coach Reeve is akin to the Coach Pop of the NBA?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, just with the culture that they both establish, and also the knowledge that they spread throughout. That's one thing Gregg Popovich has done a phenomenal job at, is his coaching tree is insane.
Yeah.
Just his knowledge that he passes down. Cheryl Reeve is very similar to that, with her assistant coaches and with her players. I know with, countless coaches, assistant coaches that have left, that have been on her staff, she wants to set them up for a future job. She wants to set them up for a head coaching job. And that's the same with, Rebecca Brunson, Lindsay Whalen, Eric Thibault on the coaching staff right now. She wants to teach them everything that she can so that they can one day be in her role. Maybe not with the Lynx, but in a similar role in the league. So, it is kind of a similar layout. I don't like comparing across leagues just because it's completely different. But
sure,
just looking at the role of both what, with Gregg Popovich was when the Spurs were the Spurs, him leading kind of the decision making, obviously the coaching, kind of the personnel shifts, all of that stuff, in-game adjustments, like they're both brilliant at that. And I think that's with any good head coach or any good leader. They both do a phenomenal job at that. And I think Cheryl is the best in league history. Mike Thibault is maybe right there with her, but she's maybe one of the best at what she does, and especially how she makes in-game adjustments. I think, unmatched.
I want to shift to Napheesa Collier. This season, she's averaging around 24 points a game,
MVP.
close to 8. Yep, that's why I was good. Just going to head on. With her, it seems, I would say, not just this season, but previous season, she's been one of the most prominent players in the league. But yet, just from a marketing standpoint, it seems like she's very underrated. And I don't think her game necessarily reflects of that compared to somebody, we're talking about the Spurs, of a Tim Duncan, who that's very easily to overlook his game. I don't see that with Napheesa Collier. I think it's very easy to appreciate her game and just how great she is. What do you think how that factors into her motivation? And can you kind of give our audience kind of the clue them into what makes her so great? Because I don't think she gets the credit or the attention that she deserves based on not only her output on the court, but off the court too, in terms of just how much of a force she is in women's basketball as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of compare her, style-wise with on the court and off the court with just her impact on social issues or just the league in general or whatever it may be. I compare her to Maya Moore. There's a lot of similarities there. They're from the same hometown, Jefferson City. Obviously played for the Lynx, went to UConn. It's a insane comparison how identical almost they are. But she's great on the court, and as you said, she makes she's reshaping, her and Breanna Stewart with Unrivaled, they're reshaping how women's basketball is looked at and how they're compensated too. They're making an incredibly strong impact just with who they are, not necessarily just as who they are as players. And that's, to me, more impressive. But her on the court, a lot of players on the Lynx and league-wide, they call her the silent killer, silent assassin, because she does it in such a quiet way that I think that leads into kind of the lack of interest or hype around her or whatever it may be. She's not a extremely vocal person. She's active on social medias, but maybe not as much as the other stars are in the league. She Unrivaled has helped in that, in the image of people just kind of becoming more familiar with who Napheesa Collier is. But she, I look at the game when they played the Liberty on July 30th, the night before we're recording this, she dropped 30 points. She had 30 points, 9 rebounds, and it didn't really seem like she had 30 points. And that's just Napheesa Collier. She could drop, 30, 10, 5, and 5, and you would just think she had 15 points. She does it in such a quiet and kind of elegant way that is impressive, and she does it so consistently. But the drive inside of her she has a fire inside of her that is, it motivates her on a nightly basis. She always says, I want to be better than what I was last year. I want to get better in a certain area every season. And that's what the great players do. She's already great, but you just got to keep adding to your game. And that's what we've seen this year. And she's using maybe some of the, I don't want to say disrespect, but maybe the lack of attention. She's using that as motivation to kind of show people wrong and to kind of prove a point. And she's motivated to win a title. And that's at the root of everything. She wants to win, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Yeah, she's having, to me, she's a clear front runner for MVP. If she continues on this pace, even just kind of coasts the rest of the season, I think she's the winner. I don't know if it'll be unanimous, but I think it'll be close. But she's had a phenomenal year, and no pun intended, but she's been great, and she only keeps getting better, which is even crazier to think about.
Yeah, it kind of feels like what you just mentioned with the 30 points against the Liberty, very high profile key matchup. That seems like one of those key wins of the season that you kind of need to notch in an MVP race, and she's already got that.
Right. Yeah, she's you have to show up against the big teams in the big moments, and she does that. When every time New York went on a run in that first game against Minnesota, the Lynx had an answer, and Napheesa Collier was at the center of it. And that's what the great players do. That's what all the legends do. That's, if you want to be MVP, you got to do that. And that's the stuff that you got to do. And Cheryl Reeve talks about it all the time too, that the great players don't take a night off. You can be tired, you can be, maybe you're banged up, whatever it may be, but you can't take a night off. And that's, she's just consistent, and she is on a completely other level. I know coming into this season, she really wanted to focus on her 3-ball, and that was her area that she wanted to improve upon from last year. And she's done that, and she's improved her game in other ways too, another, inside out and defensively. I mean, she's reigning defensive player of the year. So she's just a complete total package. And, it's amazing. It continues to amaze me how good she is and how much better she keeps getting, especially knowing just how good she is already.
Can you take our audience through the vibe of the fan base for the Lynx? I always like to really delve into just the basketball culture of each city, of the experts like yourself that we bring on to the show. What is the culture like with the Lynx compared to the Timberwolves? I see clips that I always interested, they dance, the Lynx do after a victory. What is that culture like, and how does that bring in, the fans that go and pay their money to see them? Because I just think of like Sacramento, where they just like the beam. There's just some other things that really draw that connection to the fan base that separates it from other teams within the NBA or WNBA.
Yeah, the Lynx fan base is unlike any I've ever experienced, and I even different than the Timberwolves fan base, even though it is a lot of the same fans. I say this not a lot, but sometimes that, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. Lynx fans are crazy in the best way possible. They're crazy, but they show up, they support their team, and that's what I mean when I mean crazy. But they are rowdy. They love to cheer on their team. They are very emotional and passionate when it comes to the Lynx. And that shows through with the atmosphere inside of Target Center every night or every home game. That is one thing that I started covering the team kind of middle of the way through their 4 titles that they had in that dynasty era. And that is one thing that has reigned true from the point I started until now, is that Target Center is an incredibly hard place to play. Lynx fans are incredibly passionate. They show up every night, and they make it a hard atmosphere to play for the opposing players. And I think that's why we've seen Minnesota off to a 15-1 start this season at home too. It is a home court advantage that is unlike anything I've seen in the W specifically. Yeah, the Lynx fans are very passionate. It is a community. Sometimes you have sports teams that it's just a statewide thing. They support their team, whatever, but it really does feel like a community with Lynx fans. And even as writers and reporters that cover the team, like you feel a part of it. And I go back to one thing Cheryl Reeve said maybe a handful of years ago, that you come to a Lynx game, just come to one. If you've never come to a Lynx game, just come to one and you'll be hooked and you'll be sucked in. And that's the environment that they do establish, and that reigns true. I've heard from countless people like, hey, we went to our first Lynx game, we'll be back. And that's the welcoming and open environment that they kind of provide. And Lynx fans, you can go up and say whose house, and they'll be yelling our house back to you, because they always chant that at the games, whose house, our house. But no matter where they're at, wherever the Lynx are playing, there's always a group of Lynx fans. So they're great. It makes it fun to cover the team too, when you have a fan base that backs you and supports you. Even as a writer, I'm not a part of the team, and I feel like they, a lot of them support me. So it's a great experience, and it's a fan base unlike any other, I think.
I have to ask, because the Lynx, I think compared to other franchises, they're one of the stronger traditions in the league, and kind of one of the more consistently supportive fan bases that the league has. Have you noticed a difference since, I would say, like 2 seasons ago, when the WNBA came into more national prominence perhaps than it had seen before? Have you noticed a change among the Lynx fanhood tied to that? Has it just kind of grown even bigger, or stayed about the same? Or
I'd say honestly, the Lynx fan base has, I think it's stayed the same for the most part over the last couple of years. I think if there is a few things that I've spotted that is maybe a little different, is you're seeing boys and girls at a younger age that expect women's basketball, they expect the WNBA, they grew up watching it, or they're growing up watching it. You're getting kind of another generation of fans, which is outstanding. I think that's one of the more rewarding things of the WNBA and the product that it produces, is you're having these younger kids grow up knowing that this is a norm, and they can expect women's basketball to be there just maybe like the NBA is. But one other thing that I have noticed is maybe opposing crowds coming a little bit more, maybe opposing fans, which is great. I mean, I think that's league wide. You're seeing a lot of even casual fans that, maybe they live in, Indiana and they're Lynx fans. Well, they're Lynx and Fever are playing. They're going to a Fever game and they're supporting the Lynx team, even if they're not based in Minnesota. So there is a lot of that. I mean, Caitlin Clark, obviously, when she comes to Minnesota, there's a flood of Indiana fans, even if they are Minnesota residents. Yeah, I would say that that's probably the biggest difference. I mean, the fan base continues to grow. I think it continues to grow league wide, but Minnesota has consistently been between, I think it's like 9 and 11 average audience or fan base per game, and they've been top 5, oftentimes top 2, 3 in the league at the end of the year when it comes to attendance. But the Lynx fan base has been there, and I think it'll only continue to grow as well as the rest of the league.
Final question. We've been asking a lot of our WNBA experts this. The CBA is coming up, the collective bargaining agreement. Lots of chatter regarding that. We just talked about Napheesa Collier. She is on the front lines trying to negotiate a better deal for the players. What's your insight in terms of what's going to happen? We've talked to our different experts have pointed to lockouts. Some say it's not going to happen. Where do you kind of fall in terms of what's going to happen? Come on,
yeah, I think it's, to me, I mean, it's never, you can never count on a lockout, but I think it's a little early to be talking about lockout, just because we have a lot left to unfold between now and that would happen. I do think you can tell the players are frustrated, understandably so. I mean, I would be if I was in their position too. They just want fair revenue share like some of the other leagues have. They're not asking for money like NBA players or NFL players or MLB players, whatever. They're not asking for that kind of money. They're asking for their fair share based on the overall league revenue, and that's something that hasn't been the case so far. And it does seem, just even looking at or hearing the stuff around All-Star weekend, it does seem to me like they're far away on talks right now in those negotiations. I mean, the players wouldn't have wore those "pay us what you owe us" shirts before the game if they were close. So that to me means that they are far away yet. But I wouldn't count out a lockout or even a shortened season. The players, specifically in the WNBA, they will stand up for what they believe in. We've seen that with social justice issues. We've seen that with different, current event issues around the globe, not even basketball related, how the WNBA is kind of united and taken a stand in that regard. Even, specifically with the Lynx, they've been kind of the forefront of a lot of that stuff. But the players will make a stand. If they feel like they're not being treated fairly or they're not getting a fair share, they're not going to play. And I think that when you have other options too, like you have Unrivaled, that's kind of pushing the envelope now, which, like I said, it's groundbreaking for what women's sports will establish into or kind of grow into, just compensation wise. That is paving the way for what we will see in the WNBA, I think. And then the players also have overseas options. They get a lot more money to play overseas. A lot of players will take off a season to play overseas just because they're getting paid more money than they would in the WNBA. So the W has to step up, and they have to pay their players. Otherwise, they're not going to be afraid to go overseas for a season, or they're not going to be afraid to, maybe they extend the Unrivaled season if there is a lockout. Who knows? I mean, there are a lot of options, and that's good though. Competition drives up other areas. And I think that's exactly what's specifically happening with Unrivaled, and just kind of where the W will go from there. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't count out a lockout, but I think we still have a little ways to go before I push that panic button.
Mitchell, thank you very much for joining the show. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where you're available on social media, any upcoming projects, and where they can catch your coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. On social media, you can find me on X. You can find me on Blue Sky. My Twitter/X handle is M_Hansen13. That's HANSEN. And then you can catch my work at canishoopus.com. I host a podcast, Hitting the Hardwood. I also team up with a few other Minneapolis-based writers and reporters that do their own podcast underneath the Hitting the Hardwood umbrella. And then I also write some national or kind of general WNBA and specifically Lynx stuff for winsider.com. And I think that's it. I think that about covers it. But you can find me on social media to find all of my work. I'm regularly sharing a lot of that stuff on there. So I appreciate you guys having me, and it was a blast talking to you guys.
I appreciate you making the time. Thank you, Mitchell. Much appreciated.